Hey folks, how you doing? I'm Jeff Donor. I'm the co-creator of AHTV, and you are watching AHTV. What is AHTV? Well, more on that later. But first, we have done a few lives here, Instagram lives at AHTV, and we have recently uploaded them to our YouTube channel at bpl.productions, and we'll put a link at the bottom so you can follow us there on YouTube and subscribe. So we have uploaded these interviews so that we can revisit these incredible human beings, and one of those humans is Chemi Lhamo. And if you aren't familiar with Chemi Lhamo, well, she is a force to reckon with. Not only is she a fierce and staunch Tibetan freedom movement activist, she is a wonderful human being who ran for office here in Toronto as well, and is a community builder and so much more. And please enjoy this interview that I had with Chemi back in February of this year. Hello everybody. Welcome to our AHTV Live. I am Jeff Donor. I am the co-creator of AHTV. I'm also the co-founder of Bureau of Power and Light, art collective based here in Toronto. AHTV is one of our projects, and I appreciate everyone joining us tonight. Tonight we will be talking with Chemi Lhamo, and if you don't know who Chemi is, she is a powerhouse. A long list of accolades for Chemi, and we're going to find out all about that in just a moment. I'm going to invite her in here, and we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone. I'm trying to wave to everybody, and I'll do my best to continue. Hello, Sean from Safe Room. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to invite Chemi in here now, and we're going to get underway, and then we'll tell you about what our topic is and what we'll be focused on mainly in this hour. For this wonderful backdrop that I've used pretty much every single live so far. Oh, there's Chemi.
Hi.
I'm okay. Sorry, I'm just going to get you into my headphones here. I have them on my ears, but I don't have them plugged into the actual interface. Give me 1 sec. See if I can do this. Sorry, I thought I was prepared. Yeah, I think I can hear you. Can I hear you? I think I'm good. Oh yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. It is an absolute honor to have you on what we're calling AHTV, because we're building a bit of an idea, a bit of a project here to take AHTV Instagram and boost it 1,000 times into our own show. So this is just sort of piloting that idea. So I really appreciate you joining us on a Saturday eve. I know you are busy, and I've been looking forward to this chat. How are you? Yeah.
Alive.
Good.
I'm grateful.
Good. And just waving to people while we talk. Chemi, we've known each other for a few years. It's probably about maybe 8 years-ish or so. And it's
been an absolute pleasure getting to know you, and you have enriched my life, and watching you and your actions and how involved you are in making this world a better place here locally, on the ground, in Toronto, also elsewhere in the world. And I don't think one live, in fact, I know for sure one live will definitely not cover everything that you have accomplished and everything that you do. So that means this will just be the first of hopefully a few more of these. When we spoke about what to talk about, we did go over a few different topics because there are so many different things that we could be addressing. In particular, about the Tibetan human rights situation and the ongoing genocide there. I mean, we can call it that, right? It's a, some people call it cultural genocide. It is most definitely that. And in particular lately, and maybe not so lately, more lately that it's coming to light and escalating, is the presence of the colonial boarding schools that are in Tibet, and that are an ongoing issue there. And you just got back from Ottawa. You were there yesterday to speak for the. I just want to make sure that I say it right. It was, you testified at the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. And you were joined by Dr. Gallo Ladon from the Tibet Action Institute, I believe Sophie Richardson as well from the Human Rights Watch. And you testified on particularly on this topic. And I was speechless after, because I consider myself to be somewhat up on the situation in Tibet. Listening to you speak yesterday, and listening especially to Dr. Gallo and his personal experiences there, wow, it's really hard to hear, and it's really hard to listen to, and that this is happening right now. I think Ladon characterized it as genocide 2.0 in this whole thing. Can you tell me a little bit about what is going on there right now, in particular in regards to the boarding schools?
Well, I think prior to going into colonial boarding schools, just to give folks who are listening an idea of what the situation inside of Tibet is, that since 2008, Tibet has been in complete lockdown. Of course, in 1959, that's when the Chinese Communist government came into our lands and basically took over illegally and occupied, which led to thousands of Tibetans fleeing into India and Nepal, following His Holiness the Dalai Lama. However, right now the situation inside Tibet is such that the Chinese government is basically trying to eradicate the Tibetan identity. Our Tibetan identity is generally made up of 3 pillars, starting with the nomadic way of life, our religion, and our language. And there's also been a report by, I believe, freetibet.org, who talks about the religious sites that have been completely destroyed in Tombuk County, where there's Buddha statues that are being destroyed. People who are releasing videos of these statues are getting arrested and facing not just prosecution but persecution. And in addition to that, we know that millions of nomads have been relocated from their grasslands into just concrete blocks where there are no opportunities to survive and thrive in various societies. And now language. The report by Tibet Action Institute has stated that there's about 800,000 Tibetan children as young as between 6 to 18 who are in colonial boarding schools. And what Dr. Jallo shared at the testimony is that there are at least conservatively 150,000 children as young as 4 and 5 who are in preschool boarding, which is a complete hidden policy by the Chinese government. So children as young as 4 and 5 years old are being stripped away from their parents to attend boarding school. Now imagine sending 4-year-olds 5 days a week into schools where they're learning how to speak, read, and write in Chinese instead of their own mother tongue. That's that. And Dr. Jallo has also shared about, some of the experiments that they're doing. They're basically sending undergraduate students, Han Chinese undergraduate students, to Tibetan areas to teach Tibetan children who are clearly not certified to be able to teach, coming into these areas and telling these young children or giving them a Chinese cultural object and basically telling them to close their eyes and imagine the object, and then later on telling the children to draw what they've imagined, and then telling them to explain what they've drawn. And so this type of brainwashing, not just completely not giving them opportunities to speak and read and write their own mother tongue, it's brainwashing them to become Chinese instead of Tibetan. And so there's this insidious way of eradicating the Tibetan identity is very similar to what we've heard, has been done to the indigenous communities all over. And the real goal is to just basically kill the Tibetan children. It's not with the gunpoint now. It's just forcing parents to have no choice apart from sending them to these.
Now, what can parents refuse? What happens if they say no, we don't?
From what I've heard,
we don't want.
Yeah. So first and foremost, if your kids don't go to preschool, you can't get enrollment in grade 1. So that means that the moment your 4 and 5-year-olds are not attending these mandatory preschools, what happens is that they're not able to get an education. That's one. And without an education and being able to navigate the Chinese society inside of Tibet means that you'll live a second to none type of lifestyle, right? There's that. And then in addition to that, they've been basically forced. They've shut down every local school that is around. Any opportunity for them to learn their own mother tongue is also not available, because previously you'd be able to learn Tibetan in like private schools or in monasteries that would run Tibetan classes. Now there's no other option to be able to learn and grow in an environment. So there's that. And then third, it's just that you'll get arrested.
Can you
easily arrest you.
Can you talk a little bit about the effect on the children themselves? I mean, Dr. Jallo, pardon me, I said Gallo, it's Jallo. It's Gallo, okay.
Yeah, no, it's Gallo.
So I watched the session yesterday, and I took notes while you were talking, and I got through most of the question period. And there was one thing that Dr. Jallo shared, because I guess he had been around and toured a lot of the different schools, and really had a firsthand account of what was going on, and spoke to parents and the effect. And one thing that he mentioned was visiting many of these, which, as you say, are mandatory preschool. So this is before kindergarten, I guess, in that range. This is before that. And parents don't have a choice. He said that they would come home and they wouldn't hug their grandparents. They would sit further away from their family members. They would be like strangers, and would speak Mandarin, even only after 3 months of being there. And I understand a lot of them, they are gone for 3 months at a time, and so far away that family can't really visit, right? And prior to this, they did not speak Mandarin and only spoke Tibetan. So can you speak a bit on the effects on the children themselves?
Mm-hmm. It's detrimental, right? When you're denied the opportunity to learn your own mother tongue, that I think, as a psychology and neuroscience undergrad, it's detrimental, because these years of between 3 to 5 are your formative years of being able to create and being able to speak. And during those years, the Chinese government is basically trying to uproot the Tibetan identity out of these Tibetan children. But Dr. Jallo's experience that he shared is actually his own personal experience.
Oh, so this was, oh, right, okay. Right.
2 grandnieces.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually a professor, and he was teaching in Guangzhou, and one of the most prestigious universities for minority languages. And during that time, his brother called him home and said, you know, the grandkids are acting very strange. Come take a look. And so he had gone, and he had found out that they had been in preschool boarding. And on the Friday night, he went and picked up the kids, and he observed them. And while he was observing, he noticed that these kids, you know, just after 3 months of attending this preschool boarding, they're no longer hugging their parents, grandparents, they're not interacting with them, and ultimately acting as strangers and guests in their own homes. So this is what 3 months of attending these mandatory preschools 5 days a week has done to these young children, 4 and 5-year-olds. And then he took on his academic fieldwork across all of the original provinces of Tibet, from Kham and Amdo included. And he went and visited physically more than 50 preschools, and he noticed that the conclusion was exactly the same. Tibetan children are being forced to turn into Han Chinese.
Oh, man. I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Dr. Gallo as well that recounted about families that, because their kids are being taken so far away, that families are actually moving to be just outside of the schools. And when we talk about the very obvious parallels here, right, to what has happened here in Canada, and I remember seeing pictures here where it would be the same thing, that they would be camped out around the residential school, the family, to try to be close to their families. And now I hear this happening. It's the same sort of thing, to try to be close to them and have some kind of connection, because it's the only way, right? And it sounds like they don't have much. Can you talk a bit about what communication that they might even have, or do they have with their families when these children are away?
No, I believe that the children are not able to get out for the 5 days that they're in. For ones that are close, and parents are able to pick them up. So Friday evening is when they get picked up, and then Sunday evening they get dropped off back at the school. So these instances of parents moving, they're moving to urban centers, you know, part of the family, and they would be basically living in their cars outside of their schools, even though they can't visit them even during the week, just to be close to them. And that's been just to be close, you know. And as you said, these stories are just heartbreaking and heart-wrenching that that's happening right now in real time. You know, we talk about what happened here, and we know that it was not right. I think everyone could agree that it should not have happened, and it's happening in real time as we speak, inside of Tibet, to Tibetan children, and that's 80% of Tibetan children.
Like, I can't even wrap my head around that. Like, time to time. It's just, it's unfathomable, right?
Yeah. And you know, Jeff, you know, the Tibetan community in exile and diaspora there's only about 150,000 of us that live outside of Tibet. And most of the population is still inside of Tibet. And to know that the Chinese government has clearly realized that they're not able to eradicate the Tibetan identity and the faith and the devotion that we have for His Holiness the Dalai Lama in the older generations, right? So what they've done is their go-to is, one, completely lock down Tibet, so that we have no international support, no information is able to get out of Tibet, so that, you know, nobody knows what's happening. And I can tell, you know, I can be a witness to that, because I travel the world and I meet folks, and they're saying to me like, oh, Tibet's still having an issue? And I'm like, is this the the world's understanding? A layperson from around the world is like, they're like, oh, in the 70s Tibet was such a big thing, like what happened, like is it bad, is it free? These are the type of questions that we have to navigate and deal with, and that's exactly by design. The Chinese government has completely locked down Tibet. We have completely no access. Back in the days prior to 2008, thousands of Tibetans were able to flee Tibet, and then we'd get information on the grounds from these people. In the past decade, only a handful of people are able to get out. There's that. And the second is this insidious hidden policy of preschool boarding. They are trying to uproot the Tibetan identity by basically having all of the next generation not even know that they're Tibetan. And that's game over, And I've heard Dr. Jallo say this, that in the next 15, 20 years, if we do not close and shut down these colonial boarding schools, it's going to be hard for us to come to a point where we can even have a dialogue. So what type of dialogue is there to be had if Tibetans are not Tibetan? And that's where we're heading.
You spoke to, so you were questioned yesterday. Arif Varani was there as well, and of course he's well versed on what is going on in Tibet. I believe he's involved with the Friends of Tibet in Parliament as well. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah, we have multiple
parliamentarians
involved in that.
And he had asked what the impacts are on the parents. You mentioned that it was basically they have to comply. What will particularly happen to parents if they say no? Can they be imprisoned? Does that happen? Yeah.
Yeah, I heard Dr. Jallo respond to that question by saying, first and foremost, like, that kids cannot get to grade 1, right? So you as a parent are making a choice to basically not give your children education in a society where they need to be able to navigate the world, especially given that it's been colonized by China. And that's first. Secondly is that they'll get cut off from any welfare and social services.
Yep.
So any sort of supports that they're able to get from the government in any way would be completely cut off, and so they will not be eligible. Mind you, as Tibetans, we can barely even get access to a passport, right? A Chinese passport to be able to get out of Tibet. And so forget passport, it's even as basic as social services, and navigating your local society would be absolutely challenging to do so if you do not send your kids to these mandatory boarding schools, preschool boarding. And then thirdly is that if you say, I can still kind of live in my rural Tibet areas without having any of these services, they'll come and arrest you.
What is our government doing? How long is our government, first of all, how long is our government known about this?
The report had come out in 2021, and it's been over about just over a year. The report has been out. I would say the responsibility of doing something is not just within our government, it's the world. What has the world done so far, right? The report has been out, but there's tons of reports. But to be paying attention to this, Dr. Jallo, Harunla, and like the team of Tibet Action, everyone has been working tremendously hard in the past year to be doing government informal meetings and having conversations with UN representatives, which has resulted to what we see now today. We saw statements made by the UK government. We've seen a statement by the US government. Not necessarily the government, but congressmen through the CCC. And now we also saw a press release from the United Nations. And prior to the press release, they had sent a communication in November 2022 to the Chinese government, which basically legitimized the findings of the report and said that 1 million Tibetan children are in residential schools. That's what the UN said. We've stuck to the terms of colonial boarding schools because we do not want to make sure that they don't get conflated with ideas of what happens here, what has happened here. Excuse me. So far, UN, UK, US has spoken out, but Canada, we've not heard anything yet. And that's why we wanted to make sure that we paid this visit last week to Ottawa so that we can have briefings with parliamentarians one-on-one. Initially, we had requested for a committee hearing. It was declined. It was moved to an informal meeting. We had an informal meeting with the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Subcommittee of Human Rights. After this informal meeting, during that, we had about 18 MPs that showed up. And they had all agreed that this was something that needed to be public, and it should be a testimony, a hearing that needed to be done by the Subcommittee of Human Rights. So I guess it was one step forward. We were able to get a public testimony done. So this is going to go on the records of the Canadian government. We did this on Friday, and it's actually available online for folks if they'd like to watch the testimony.
Yes, on Parlvu, I think it's
now, what is the Canadian
Parlvu view? Yeah.
Parlvu.
Okay.
Yeah. So now, what is the Canadian government doing is exactly like we need to push. The Chinese government is constantly finding ways to bully.
As they have forever, right?
All across the world.
Always.
Yep. We've faced intimidation tactics, harassment here on Canadian soil, and still the Canadian government has not been able to do much. Now there's 3 Chinese police stations that are operating here in Canada. Some are in Markham, Toronto, and we still have not done anything. We've also heard about the interference of our elections by the Chinese government, and things haven't been done. In regards to this issue, we were very keen on making sure that we paid a visit and tried really hard to connect with Canadians and people who live in Canada and the Canadian government, because for obvious reasons, we know we have a history, we have a legacy of this intergenerational trauma. We know the consequences of residential schools, what happens to the generations to come. And it's not just 1 or 2 generations, it's for a long time. How it really just almost eradicates the complete identity and civilization that has thousands and thousands of years of history prior. So we had recommendations during the testimony. We've recommended the Subcommittee of Human Rights to release a statement immediately that basically voices and echoes the concerns made by the UN rapporteurs. 4 of the UN special rapporteurs have called China to basically shut down the colonial boarding school system. We've also asked them to undertake a study on the preschool boarding. Mind you, this preschool boarding policy has been completely hidden even by the Chinese government. Clearly, that tells me the Chinese government is worried and also knows that this is wrong. And so that's why they've kept it hidden. And they've kept it hidden. So now we would like the international community to step in and to be able to really investigate. Let's go and see how many children are being held, how many children have been ripped from their parents and are now being forced and coerced to basically become Chinese even though they're not.
And
right?
how
so far those are some steps.
So that's definitely an uphill battle, to say the least, to gain access. And to also gain access, to get access, then what are they going to be looking at? What are they allowed to look at? Where are they allowed to go? So that was, you were kind of leading into what my next question was what are real tangible steps that governments can take other than calling out China and speaking about how this is wrong? It's a human rights abuse. I think people would step back from calling it genocide because lots of world leaders are hesitant to use that because of the ramifications of what that means and the retaliation, as you just spoke about, and the bullying of China. what are the practical steps that can be made that will actually have some real effect there?
I think diplomatic relations need to follow
Yeah.
reciprocity. If it's clear that Tibetan Canadians are not able to get visas to be able to attend, to be able to visit Tibet, then that should be reciprocated for those same Chinese officials that are denying us visas to be able to attend, to be able to go to our own home country. And this is basically moving
Yep.
towards sanctions. We know names of the architects of these colonial boarding schools. We also know the names of people who have put millions of people in concentration camps in
Yes.
East Turkestan. We know the people that were in charge of Tibet, where got promoted to go to East Turkestan and basically deploy the experiments they were putting on Tibetan people now in East Turkestan. The guys that were in charge in East Turkestan then ordered back to Tibet, so that if they're not able to deal with the Tibet issue the way it's working, then they can resort to other things. So it's pretty clear what China is, the Chinese government is hell-bent on doing, and we need to hold them accountable, whether it is trade, economic ties. We need to diversify our investments that we make as not just Canada, but the rest of the international community. Even in Canada, we recently saw the Indo-Pacific strategy, and they just like say all of these things, human rights violations, and then they go, and Tibet. And Tibet was just one word, right? Given that there's 1 million children in colonial boarding schools, we are just mentioning the word Tibet in the China strategy, within the Indo-Pacific strategy, I think is a shame, and it says that sends Chinese government a message and signal that Canada's not going to do it.
And I'll be like, if I'm not mistaken, we don't have the greatest track record for holding China accountable because, and you mentioned it right there, trade relations and threatening those relations, and that always seems to trump the human rights. And whenever any of our leaders go over to visit, it seems like this: you shouldn't do that. That's not good, and that's about it. And I don't see anything substantial from our government in standing up to that power. And it seems like a lot of empty kind of posturing, really, that doesn't really have any real effect, which is unfortunate.
No, I agree. It might be hard, yes, if Canada is the only one sticking their neck out. But that's not what we're asking, right? We've had actions taken place by their various governments. And so we need a multilateral forum and all of these like-minded governments to rise together and hold China to account. As simple as that. How dare they sit in human rights conversations in United Nations? Despite the fact that everybody knows that they've got more than 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, they've got 1 million Tibetan children in colonial boarding schools where they're basically trying to eliminate the Tibetan identity. How dare they even sit on a table and say, oh yeah, we're talking about human rights, and point fingers at anybody else? Just hold them accountable. It's diplomatic relations. This is not more than anything that we're asking for. This is basic reciprocity diplomacy that should be maintained in those spaces, because if not, then what was the point of signing a genocide convention? What is the point of signing all of these major international treaties of holding democracy, or upholding these Western democracies in general? So it's just a shame that China is able to just step all over the rules and do whatever they like. And we're not holding them to account. Why? Because we're afraid of trade. But did you realize that if we all actually joined our hands together and say, no, China, you cannot do this, we can hold them to account. There's nothing that they could do. They're also as dependent on trade as
and that is a point
are.
that I feel like is lost so many times in that conversation, that it's not just this one-sided thing. And that's why I feel like a lot of the threats from China are a lot of bluster, because they do depend. But people are sort of conditioned to fear that they step back. Well, we don't want to cross China. Well, what do you mean? Why? And you brought up a good point about people need to come together at not just one country. I ask you about ours because obviously I'm interested in what our own government is doing, but they can't do it on their own. And they need, and it also brings into question is the UN doing enough? I have a lot of questions about the UN too, and a lot of issues with the UN as a body, as being an effectual body, or perhaps an ineffectual body in really implementing any kind of change. But that's another conversation. So the one other thing I want to talk about, one other issue I want to talk about is DNA collections too, because this is another thing that has been ongoing. I want to step back for a sec though, and just for people who don't know, if I may talk a little bit about the situation with Tibet and the sort of the context there. So as you mentioned, Tibet, they started to make their inroads in around the Korean War, whenever all the attention was there, and they were a de facto independent country. The empire before, the Manchu Empire before that was there since the 1600s, dissipated, fell apart. And so they were essentially an independent country, and they were before that anyway. But at least in that period with the 13th Dalai Lama, there's no question, right? They were an independent country. They had their own money. I mean, I don't need to go on. They were, and the facts are there to see that. Not only is China doing this and implementing this kind of genocide to Tibet, Tibet is still an illegally occupied country, a state, within all of this stuff that is going on as well. And that's something that has become just sort of an accepted thing it's an accepted situation in a sense, right? Which is well, we can't, even back then, we don't want to mess with China. So there's that context as well. It's not just within their own country, it's that they're illegally occupied territory, right? Or a state, they are their own state. And now happening inside that state as well. And now we get to the DNA collection and what has been going on there. Can you tell us DNA collection that I understand is not an elective thing, that they are doing this by force? Can you talk a little bit about that and what is happening there?
China is on a mission to basically have the largest DNA bank in the world. What they aim to do with this, one can only start to imagine. And prior to a few years ago, they were helped by an American company that sold all of these DNA kits and blood sampling kits to collect Uyghur people's blood. And what has happened in the recent years is Human Rights Watch has released a report where we've counted 1.2 million Tibetans who've been forced to give their blood samples, and their DNAs has been collected by the Chinese government. And that includes children as young as 3 years old. What is the Chinese government's plan when they're collecting the DNA and blood samples of Tibetans? We already know that China has a history of organ harvesting. We know that there are different new techniques of biometric repression that can take place with the new advanced technologies. It's an elimination project, simple as that, Jeff.
I have a quote from that too, right here from Human Rights Watch, and part of that report, the purpose of the DNA collection in the Chamdo municipality, which is in eastern Tibet traditionally, One of the 7 regions was described as improving verification efficiency and helping catching fleeing persons. In other areas of the region, residents were told similarly that the collection of DNA was needed for general crime detection. As one, like, who would buy this anyway, like in their right mind, right? But as one official report put it, mass collection is necessary for the public security organs to detect various illegal cases and to effectively crack down on illegal and criminal elements. So this is coming from that Human Rights Watch report. How can people listen to that and accept that? Even if that was true, how could that even be possible for them to do that in any, with any morals, right? Like even if that was their intent.
Well, when China is doing all of this and Tibetans and the communities affected are begging the international community to do something, and we continue to ignore, then China gets a message. They are emboldened. They think that they can continue doing whatever the heck they want with the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, the Hong Kongers, soon it will be the Taiwanese, and who knows where, when it will ever stop, because they're just going to keep going if we don't put our foot down and make a stand and say that this is completely wrong. So one thing that is within our actions, for sure, as someone that is living in North America, we know that the company Thermo Fisher is involved, directly involved in selling their DNA kits and blood sampling technologies to the Chinese government that is being used to forcefully collect the DNA and blood samples of Tibetans. When we know that there's an American company out here that has various locations, even including in Canada, why are we not holding them accountable?
Well, so you're bringing me to my next sort of focus, I guess, and it's part of the title of this whole talk is the global context of the human rights issue in Tibet. So it's not isolated in the sense of what's happening there. And Ladon talked about this too in your talk yesterday about the interconnections, that we need to treat it as a thing, but that it's not in a vacuum. This is happening with other world leaders and complicit. I think when you go and you do a talk and you don't talk about human rights, you are complicit in this. If you don't hold them accountable, you are. Sorry? Yeah, you're complicit. And anybody who trades with China that doesn't hold them accountable is complicit. And it's the as I mentioned in the description of this live and the post that I made, talking about the corporate colonial machine. It's at the root of just about all the evils in the world that you can really trace back to what is going on in this world. It has to do with imperialism, colonialism, and we can't talk about climate change without talking about colonial corporate greed. We can't talk about human rights abuses without talking about that. We can't talk about police budgets increasing without talking about that. Because why do police budgets increase? Because police are here to protect property and they're here to maintain the status quo at whatever cost. And the reason why things like Cop City are being proposed and built down in Atlanta is because I think the fear is that people don't want that and don't support that, and we need to build more and more power and policing to hold and repress that and to maintain the status quo, because the status quo is that it's profit. Everything is profit driven. So when we talk about the situation in Tibet and the intersections there are a lot of intersections that we can talk about, right? Why do governments not hold China accountable? Trade, we talked about trade, it has to do with money, right? And upholding a certain a system, basically a corporate colonial system that only benefits a few. I feel like I can't help but think that that plays into how China gets away with what it does, because we continue to uphold that system, and that system is part of the relationship we have with China as countries, right? It's trade-based. And so there are direct actions to take with Tibet. There are petitions to sign. There are MPs to write emails to, and actions to take, and protesting in front of Thermo Fisher, which I believe just happened recently, did it not? There were rallies just in the last couple of weeks, I think. Is there something broader and bigger that people can be doing or focusing on as well? Do you see that connection? I don't know if I'm making sense, but I feel like there's a bigger thing here. As long as we continue to support colonial corporate systems in place, things like this happening in Tibet will continue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I made a clear line there. I tried my best.
We're in a world where we are driven by profits. And that is the goal, it seems, where the rich will continue to get richer and the folks that are on the bottom of the poverty line will just continue to fall through the cracks. So we all need to strive to do better. By taking care of ourselves in a very most individualistic way, and realizing that, we live in communities. As a human, we are social creatures. The only reason why the human species has been able to survive for eons is because of the fact that we live in communities. We're social animals. We take care of each other. We look after each other. We're there for each other. And that's why we've been able to thrive and live till today, right? If you're an animal and you basically break your leg, then either you become prey to the predator or you starve because you're not able to go and get food. And for us, we get a cast,
right.
by a doctor. Or, and you have your family members, friends, chosen family, people who take care of you. So even in that analogy, you can see how we are meant to be together, taking care of each other and rising together, pushing each other to learn, unlearn, and grow together. And so the way in which the direction of the world is heading, really sad, because it's heading to a hyper individualistic, greed oriented, and all about profit. And so that's why the world is sort of upside down, right? We know that the climate, the world, Mother Earth is suffering. That's why we see all of these earthquakes, tsunamis taking place. Yet we continue to burn fossil fuels. Yet we continue to come up with new fads of being vegan, but still harming the environment. So all of it, again, is going back into this very capitalistic, profit-driven society. So it's challenging. However, it's important that we navigate this by taking on all levels of it. As an individual, what am I doing?
Yep.
Reflecting on that way, making sure you're taking care of yourself, but also constantly pushing yourself to unlearn, be in uncomfortable situations, and be aware of your privileges, and whether it is, in all types of societies, we have various systems of oppression, and acknowledging about your privileges in ways in which you can transfer the power to be able to support and uplift communities, or pass on the mic. And then there's also all these other ways that we need to tackle and hold entities like the Chinese government accountable for what they're doing. we live in a world with treaties. We live in a world where we're constantly meeting for conferences about the climate, this and that. But if you don't have the communities that are affected at the forefront of these conversations, then it's a waste. If indigenous communities are not there at talks about climate sovereignty, then it's a waste.
You beautifully segued right into what I wanted to cover in our last 11 minutes. And just before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that I haven't been waving. I'm sorry if I haven't been waving to people because I'm so engrossed in this conversation that I just saw a few hands, so I do my best. Sorry, anyone, I'm waving now to all of you at once. So turn of the century, late 1800s, Peter Kropotkin talked about mutual aid, and he talked about how mutual aid is in the animal kingdom, and that's actually something that is actually our nature. Is to actually help each other, not fight tooth and nail and whatever. It's not that. And he wrote a book called Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution, and he talks about how that's our natural inclination, which gives me hope that that is really what we want to do. We want to work together, and that can only happen through your fabulous celebration win last fall when you first time ever ran for city council for Parkdale High Park, and you were up against incumbent Gord Perks. And no shade on Gord. Gord has done a lot of good, right? He fights the good fight. He's been in there a bit too long, but that's just me. And you faced that challenge with the most incredible energy, and you ended up getting, and I have it right here, and I'm gonna just, for anyone who doesn't know, so where are we here? So you got 31.6% of the vote. So you got 9,919 votes. Gord Perks got 11,149. So first of all, that's amazing. Like, your first time. And I consider that a win. That's worth celebrating. And it's and the incredible work you do, and the audience that you have attracted because of the good you do. I mean, listen, you were like first female speaker at Oslo Freedom Forum in Norway and in New York City. You were one of the top 50 most powerful Canadians, according to Maclean's magazine. You were deemed urban hero by Toronto Star. And then look at all these other community things. You were community health lead for, and maybe still are, not sure, for Parkdale People's Economy. You were community health lead. You were a parliamentary intern for Ariel, and you were also president of the Scarborough Campus Student Union. And I wish I had more time to get into when you talk about China's, how they got involved to try and make sure you didn't get that vote. And you, nonetheless, you beat the odds, and say beat the odds. You won. So last fall, came that close to being counselor for Parkdale High Park. And all of those other accolades play into it. But I think what is probably most important is how active you have been in your community and in Parkdale. Can you talk a little bit about your involvement, speaking of mutual aid, during COVID, and what?
Well, thank you for the kind words.
I mean every one of them.
I think it's my duty, and actually it's quite selfish, because that's how I find joy. I define myself in many ways equivalent with it, because if it wasn't for my community, I wouldn't be anywhere in front of you or anywhere in terms of running for office or any of these global stages that you mentioned. I am a product of my community, and I will continue to serve my communities in different ways because I'm a product of them. So there's that. During COVID, things were hard, challenges. I think everyone can testify to that it was really challenging to navigate during this pandemic. And we're raised in Parkdale here. Parkdale is home, and seeing that there were no services available for us except for these non-governmental associations or organizations, literally like finding scraps and funding to be able to transform their usual social services into just packing meals, getting masks and PPE for community was heartbreaking, because it was like, we have all of these resources by the government, and all of these government officials are getting paid six figures, but where are they? I didn't see a government representative even in our neighborhoods, and it was just really heartbreaking. And so, we did what we know best, is to take care of each other. So we were dropping off hot meals to seniors in our neighborhood. We had various pod leaders in different areas in our community. So I was doing deliveries for the Tibetan community, the seniors that are living and are immunocompromised. There's that. We had, of course, some of the community fridges. Shout out to community fridges. They had a couple here in Parkdale. Just, it was endless in terms of just the community showing up for each other. When it came to vaccines, Parkdale's M6K population was a hotspot, and we had all hotspots were getting vaccination sites, but M6K, we didn't get a vaccination site, and the vaccination site that was closest to us was 2 hours transit away. And it's ridiculous. So one, we're in a hotspot. We're telling people in hotspots to go and get vaccinated, but the only vaccination site that's available to us is 2 hours transit away. So you want us to go on transit for 2 hours and get other people infected by while getting vaccine? Like, it just blew my mind how stupid and how careless the rollout was by the government officials. And it showed that they clearly did not care about folks that lived.
And we're ill prepared, I guess. And was it ill prepared and a bit of will to?
That I think everyone was, and ill prepared everyone was. It's not like a lot of countries, a lot of government, a lot of municipalities were challenged by a huge challenge. However, there was infrastructure available for hotspots to be able to get access to vaccination sites in different areas. Richmond Hill didn't have this issue, but Parkdale, in South Parkdale, below Queen Street, below King Street, we're having these challenges. And so, for me, I couldn't help but ask the question of why. And that's why I actually decided to run for office, in local office. I didn't see myself ever running for city council prior to that, but it was during the pandemic where I realized that, we have for generations been taking care of our communities and each other. And now think about what we can do when we get access to the resources that are actually supposed to be in our communities. What would happen then if we had a community member in that seat to redirect the resources back into our communities? Think about how much things could be better. When I was running for office, my office, physical office, actually became a constituency office already. I was not an elected representative then, but the amount of people that came in were asking for immigration support, for, even just printing out stuff. Because in Parkdale, South Parkdale, we only have one bank. We used to have 4 banks. 3 of them are gone. The Tim Hortons in our area.
TD, I think, right on Jameson there. Arthouse TO. Anyone who wants to know more about Arthouse TO can go to our website and check that out. I remember that conversation we had because we met up in a cafe, was it in spring, late spring or something, about your run. And wow, and then where you went from that conversation, because I believed in you then that, you know, whatever you're going to do, you're going to be successful at, and to see where it went from there to where you ended up was incredible. Are you going to run again? Or do you know? Is it too soon, too early?
Um, 4 years from now, you know, as a Tibetan Buddhist, impermanence is one of the
Yes,
truths
yes, of
that we grew up
course.
with. There's actually in Tibet, there's a practice of Tibetans putting their
Hmm.
bowls, because you know everyone has a bowl of their own because that's where they
Right.
eat the barley. So the bowl, before going to sleep, they would actually put the bowl upside down, not knowing
Hmm.
what tomorrow holds on your day. Which is why I respond to how are you, being alive and grateful, um, because it is
Hmm.
a gift to be
Yeah.
alive. I do not know what the future holds, and in 4 years, you never know what could happen. The only reason I would consider not running is when I'm not as passionate and as I was this time
Yeah.
running, and that's been one of the reasons why I would not consider.
It is a
But
long ways away, and yeah,
you
there's
never
a
know.
lot. Those are wise words too. In my studying of what got me involved in being active with the Tibetan community here, as I, you know, read books and studied Tibetan culture for 15 years or longer, and then the more I realized situation, I realized, and the amount of the XL community here in Toronto, realized I thought I could be more useful, be helpful by actually getting on the ground and reaching out and connecting. But one teaching that has always stuck with me that I found so powerful is the teaching of impermanence, because it really does make you recalibrate your finite energy you have in this day, and what is the best way to use that energy, and to not expect and to not look too ahead in the future, and value what you have now and appreciate that. And you say it was a gift. This Jimmy is a gift. This time that we've had together, it really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to do this again. And maybe we'll chat. We'll chat another time about how we can I can do this live again, and maybe we can even do it together in person here when we get our Art House TV rocking. We have this really sweet storefront space in the east end of Toronto that we're perform live in. We actually have a pop-up happening right now as we speak for this weekend. Folks, come on by tomorrow live. Check out some really cool stuff. But we're animating this space in a way where we want to bring people like yourself, interviews, and so I'll keep you on that. Jimmy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Is there anything you want to say, final words or shout outs?
Not necessarily shout outs. I think going back to the
Okay.
topic of the conversation today in regards to the colonial boarding schools and the DNA, forced DNA collection of Tibetans inside of Tibet. I think that if we have the time to be on social media, we definitely have the time to
Yes.
sign a petition. There is a petition going on about Fisher, holding Tamara Fisher to account for collecting DNA samples without consent of Tibetans, and there's been 1.2 million Tibetans who've been forced to do so. In regards to the colonial boarding schools, there's 1 million children, young as 4 years old, in colonial preschool boarding, and we must act. This is possibly going to eradicate a whole civilization, and this is our moment to be raising awareness, telling your friends about it, talk about it. If you have questions, reach out, ask, educate yourself on these issues. There's a report by Tibet Action Institute. You can take a read. encourage your members of parliament to stand in solidarity and have the government of Canada act with UK, US, UN, whoever it is. Because if these institutions do not work, such as the UN, there's no hope. And this is not talking about just Tibetans. It's as a world, as communities are constantly getting bombarded with violence and war, we need to act now, and we need to make sure that institutions that are there, built and have been built to so-called restore peace in places, they need to be held accountable to do so. With that said, take care of yourselves. Lots of love to everybody watching.
Much love.
It's a
we
hard,
can still feel
life.
Joy and experience joy and celebrate, and also be connected with these issues too, right? We if anything, we need to value the people that we have in our lives, and we use the agency that we have to make this world a better place, and use our privilege. If we have privilege, and use it to make this world a better place too. I just wanted to, there was a comment by Andrew Brandt there that was saying this pattern of colonization is all too familiar, and that is so true. Andrew Brandt, please follow the Credible Mohawk. He's awesome. Some really cool stuff. Thank you for that comment, Andrew. And Chemi, Tujiche for this. I really appreciate this talk, and I appreciate your time.